I thought retirement would bring me peace. I was wrong. My own son is about to destroy everything I built, and he doesn't even know it yet. My name is Stanley Stan Miller. For 35 years, I lived in the clean lines of suburban Nassau County, New York, dedicating my life to the things people rarely see but desperately rely on: the plumbing, the wires, and the secret plans beneath the asphalt. My job in the water and utility department was the pulse of the town. When I retired at 65, I didn't have a big title, but I had a clear conscience, a simple, paid-off ranch house, and a wife, Janice, who loved the safety my predictable salary provided. That honest exit was my final masterpiece. My son, Kevin, 35, looked at our masterpiece and saw junk to be sold. Kevin, a real estate shark who measures his life in interest rates and quarterly profits, ruined us once before during the last market bust. We survived his absolutely guaranteed financial mistake, but my wife Janice carries the ghost of that anxiety daily. Now he was back, all polished Italian shoes and blinding white smiles, selling a single, aggressive message: sell the house. Cash out my modest retirement. Invest everything in his new Apollo Innovations Group Fund. Dad, you're asset-rich and cash-poor. This neighborhood is stagnant, he'd insist, his tone sharp with disguised resentment. We need to get Mom and you out of this mortgage liability and into the fast money. You've done your time. It's our time now. Janice, seeing the promise of the easy life offered by her only child and wanting desperately to shed the anxiety of holding on to an old, expensive house, began to twist the emotional knife. Stan, he's offering us security. It's the least we can do to make up for those lost years. Her pressure was soft, but absolute, driven by maternal guilt and financial fear. My choice became brutally clear: sell the last shred of my security or face the profound breakdown of my marriage to avoid the inevitable disaster of his next plan. I told them I'd do my due diligence. My due diligence, however, required an invisible, specialized set of tools I gained only from decades of keeping quiet, honest hours. I reached out to Red Kelly, an old friend who runs the nighttime archive desk at the county building. Red, knowing my background, found an excuse to give me temporary access to the department's oldest files. The secure room that keeps all the original secret maps for where the town is going to put roads and utility lines in the next 10 years. I accessed those maps, the whole unvarnished truth of the county's secret future, from a back-row computer at the public library, where I looked like any old man researching a local zoning code. I spent agonizing hours poring over those huge sheets of future road lines, water pipe plans, and sewer layouts. My professional expertise told me what a realtor's slick presentation couldn't. The Apollo Group's investment areas were not, as Kevin claimed, poised for success. My stomach sank and turned cold when I figured out what the hidden lines really meant. The secret map, which wasn't supposed to see the light of day for years, showed the new major highway expansion planned by the state. And that new road, a monstrous corridor of noise and concrete, was slated to cut right through the middle of the Apollo development land. That whole area wasn't worth selling. It was a guaranteed mess of demolition, loud construction, and property seizure lawsuits. Kevin was trying to con his parents and anyone else into buying worthless land earmarked for inevitable condemnation. But the crime was much deeper and intimately cruel. I cross-referenced that new highway map with the current town water upgrade schedule. The upgrade plan for our neighborhood was specifically being scheduled to run into a devastating and completely unexplainable 3-month-long maintenance failure, right at the peak of the hot summer. This wasn't bad management. The true interdepartmental blueprint proved a sinister coincidence. Someone was scheduling a localized, man-made, system-wide disaster to kill the water pressure for every honest home in the area. The crime wasn't in buying land cheaply, it was in forcing everyone to sell out cheap by engineering a panic. By making life hell in our modest suburban loop, ruining gardens, stopping clean laundry, creating pure desperation with no good running water, they would guarantee a total crash in local housing prices. Kevin wasn't investing. He was engaging in a systemic, massive, suburban financial attack to terrorize people into selling out cheap so he and his silent partners could flip the houses when the real money eventually arrived. Money I still couldn't account for. I was the only person with the skill set to look past the surface and see the manipulation written in the official ink. I was the one who could stop the man with my own last name. My retirement was over. I had to expose my own son as a systematic traitor before the next phase of his engineered disaster. The summer water failure started to roll out. A disaster that would destroy not only my finances, but Janice's fragile recovery. The honest utility man was officially going rogue to defend the town. I printed the crucial sections of the hidden water and road maps, physical, irrefutable proof of their calculated financial terrorism. My fight wasn't just for a house, it was for the very soul and safety of my peaceful, well-ordered street. The evidence was secured. Now came the terrifying question of how to use it without shattering my family entirely. The physical maps I'd printed from the county archives, showing the engineered water outage and the doomed highway corridor, were a chilling picture of organized crime. They were not just drawings, they were the execution schedule for Kevin's suburban terror plan. I kept the copies locked in an old, unused safety deposit box beneath my shed, the only place I knew Tevin would never think to look. It lacked the bling factor. My fear shifted completely from financial worry to the absolute terror of confronting my own flesh and blood. How do you accuse your son of being a conspiratorial domestic terrorist who's using the plumbing system as a weapon? The honest utility man couldn't simply dial 911 and say, "My son's future roadmap doesn't match the current official town records, and I suspect intentional water pressure failure is imminent." My wife, Janice, became the unwitting accomplice to the crime. She wasn't an operative for Apollo. She was just tired. The emotional burden of the high-stakes investment and the perceived luxury of an easy retirement outweighed her gut sense of caution. Her relentless daily requests for me to simply sign the papers, Stan, and stop obsessing created a profound emotional no-man's land between us. She saw me as the roadblock to happiness. I saw her as the prime, most devastating victim of Kevin's final con. The silence between us was unbearable. I couldn't tell her the truth about Kevin. Not yet, because the shock that her son was a monster who deliberately sold us worthless land and was plotting the chaos that would ruin our friends would likely send her back to the emotional state she was in during the last financial disaster. My love for Janice mandated that I had to stop the crime without destroying her faith in her son, if at all possible. The lie of his illness would have to come before the proof of his financial sabotage. I knew my information alone, coming from a retired guy who logged on to an old government system, wouldn't hold up in court against Apollo's expensive legal team. I needed backup. I needed the authority that could weaponize my municipal knowledge. My attention immediately fixed on the single common denominator I saw running in the old archive blueprints and a few of Kevin's casual social media photos. Richard Thorne. Thorne was a formidable man, a successful developer who built half the office parks on the North Shore. But more importantly, Thorne had been my department boss for nearly 20 years, rising through the ranks using a brilliant mind for infrastructure, eventually jumping to the private sector and launching his multi-million-dollar career with knowledge I knew he acquired on the county's time. Thorne was the very figure who first pushed for the confidential study of the major regional highway that Kevin was now leveraging. I didn't trust Thorne, not with my pension funds, and certainly not with my home. The pieces of the conspiracy started to click with horrifying speed.
Thorne had taught Kevin. Thorne was Kevin's mentor, now listed on several internal opaque filings as an unnamed consultant for the Apollo Innovations Group. This wasn't Kevin's small-time gambling. This was a sophisticated, high-level maneuver orchestrated by Thorne himself, who was utilizing his decades of specialized, hidden knowledge of utility weaknesses and government land plans for a criminal profit. Using my son as the public, well-dressed decoy,
My immediate step was a silent, high-stakes reconnaissance run. I told Janice I was driving out to a specialists' meeting to discuss a new retirement investment fund, an alibi she desperately wanted to believe. Instead, I drove to the gleaming Thorne Enterprises headquarters. I parked in the far back lot and watched. My target wasn't the tower. It was the parking area for the high-end cars. Within an hour, I saw it. Kevin's custom German sedan, parked right next to a much older, extremely luxurious vehicle, almost hidden near Thorne's personal entry. A clean, undeniable proof of an intimate professional relationship. As I sat in my old, worn sedan, absorbing the visual betrayal, my phone rang. It was Kevin, his voice laced with impatient, demanding fury. "Dad, Mom told me you're stalling again. I swear to God the offer from Apollo is good for 48 hours, and then you'll be chasing the bottom dollar. Sign the documents and let's go. I'm sending my assistant by with the closing papers first thing tomorrow morning. Do not make me come home and do this myself." His tone confirmed my absolute suspicion. The sale wasn't based on market timing. It was based on the rapid deployment of the criminal timetable. The 48-hour clock was not set by the market. It was set by the arrival of the scheduled water maintenance failure on Monday. They needed the deed locked in before the engineered panic began. I looked at the clean glass walls of Thorne Tower, and then at Kevin's demanding voice on my phone. My love for my son hadn't vanished. It simply shifted into a frantic, protective desire to salvage his life from the hands of the monster who trained him. Thorne wasn't just leveraging a land plot. Thorne was leveraging my son's moral future, training him to be an architect of urban decay and financial terrorism. My next step had to expose Thorne's entire framework of fraud without tipping off Kevin. I used the ultimate shield of public bureaucracy, the anonymous whistleblower complaint. I drove 50 miles south, ensuring my burner phone was completely off, and sat in an empty shopping mall food court. I accessed the single official county whistleblower hotline terminal, a simple, anonymous computer located, ironically, right next to the utility payments counter. It was a system I helped design and promised to keep secure for honest workers. I submitted my initial evidence. My testimony was deliberately incomplete, framed around systematic, generational internal corruption, rather than familial conflict. It went like this, using the precise language I knew would grab internal attention without revealing my source. Retired utility archives contain evidence of a 30-year corporate plan to manipulate county utility assets, water lines and road projects for private speculative gain, tied directly to the early acquisition of highly sensitive property knowledge. The plan's execution schedule includes imminent, non-critical, and intentional failure of water supply systems in the Long Island North Zone next week to trigger local economic panic. Current leadership needs a confidential audit of the Thorne Enterprise consulting filings before the environmental crime goes live. I sent the first package. The seed was planted. It would take a minimum of 72 hours for a slow-moving county bureaucracy to assign an honest investigator who might not be linked to Thorne. I had 2 days max until the engineered water failure. I knew my action was not safe. The anonymity was paper-thin. My decades in the department meant I spoke the exact internal language that a sharp operator like Thorne would instantly recognize. I couldn't wait for the bureaucratic pace. I had to face the monster myself. I didn't want to use the whistleblower line to destroy my family. I used it as an official timer. I was the fuse. That evening I called Thorne. My voice was calm, the voice of the technician reporting a system error. I didn't mention Kevin, I only mentioned the one piece of evidence he couldn't hide. The internal archive code for the new water main design plan from 2005. "Mr. Thorne," I stated flatly, "this is Stan Miller. Your apprentice's development map doesn't match the new real access lines. You might have missed that last system update. You forgot to account for my longevity in the department. The water failure is engineered, not market timing, and I know the code to the map you used." The ensuing silence was a physical wall, heavy, cold, and immediate. The voice that returned wasn't the smooth developer I knew. It was a venomous whisper, the voice of the conspiracy. "Stan, you were always a good dog who knew his territory. Retire quietly, walk away from that phone, and take the $2 million your boy is promising you. You audit water, you don't audit capital markets. That map, that antique map, belongs to a file that died a long time ago. Forget it, Stan. Forget it, or your little suburban retirement will get very, very dry." The terror in his tone wasn't a warning. It was confirmation. Thorne was the orchestrator, and Kevin was his compliant hand. My intervention now required an element of physical surprise. The final shot of a cornered man fighting for the only life he had left. The threat was immediate, and my wife was on the verge of handing the whole plot over to them. I had to act, using my own local knowledge as a defensive tool against the invisible corruption that was using the very lines of service I installed against me. My next confrontation wouldn't be over a map. It would be over the final papers that threatened Janice's peace. I needed to ensure my final confrontation had witnesses and irrefutable, undeniable photographic proof. My retirement was about to get extremely volatile.
Thorne's whisper, the cold promise that my peaceful life would soon become very, very dry, didn't just confirm the sabotage, it solidified the timetable. The confrontation with Thorne made the 72-hour bureaucratic timer of my whistleblower complaint utterly useless. They knew I was hunting. The move against the sale of the house was now entirely up to me. The most frightening factor wasn't the external crime, it was Janice. She was on the phone almost constantly, convinced that Kevin's impatience was due to a market deadline, not a water system maintenance disaster scheduled for Monday. The closing papers arrived on Friday morning via Kevin's clean-cut, aggressively young assistant, a woman who saw her job as the silent administration of illegal contracts. She smiled and offered me the golden-tipped pen. Janice stood next to her, radiating quiet, determined pressure. "Sign it, Stan, please. Just sign it. We're running out of time." Her face was drawn, her anxiety about disappointing her son and missing out on the easy retirement overshadowing her entire demeanor. She wanted her signature on those papers to instantly alleviate her anxiety. This house wasn't a financial investment to her, it was the psychological cage holding her fear. I had anticipated this pressure. I told the assistant I'd need the entire weekend to review the extensive addendums and necessary act of financial literacy the honest man requires. The assistant, unable to press, had to acquiesce, setting the final, immovable deadline from Monday morning, 9 a.m., the moment the closing papers for the property acquisition had to be submitted to complete Apollo's takeover of our debt, the exact day the water system would fail. My counter-strategy had to be flawless. I knew I couldn't confront Kevin with just a map printout from a secure county file. That evidence, while professionally damning, would only secure him in arrest, destroying Janice completely without full protection. I needed two things: undeniable visual evidence of the physical utility sabotage in the field, which would be activated early Monday morning, and a public neutral witness for my final confrontation. My decades in utilities granted me access to the deep subterranean language of the neighborhood.
The water control station for our community was buried deep beneath a wooded maintenance service hatch in the center of the local nature preserve. It was an access point only 3 people on the planet still held the master key for: I, Red Kelly, and Thorne himself. Late on Saturday, under the cover of dusk, I went to the maintenance hatch. I wanted to see if the engineered failure was in the planning or already physically staged. My master key granted silent access. The waterline control room, usually clean, small, and humming with constant maintenance noise, was different. The atmosphere was wrong. There were new digital monitoring leads connected to the master pipe valves. And on the old metal console where the mechanical overrides for the neighborhood water distribution lay, I found what broke the last piece of my heart. A simple 2-sentence handwritten work order clipped onto the primary flow regulator. The date was for Sunday night at midnight, authorizing a complete manual diversion of our line's primary water feed to an emergency overflow holding tank for a duration of 3 business days beginning Monday morning. The paper was signed by a familiar name, an honest crew supervisor. But beneath his clean name, in precise official handwriting, was the authorizing code Project M44, a code name I hadn't used in 2 decades, and the indelible initials KM. Kevin's initials had physically executed the work order himself, exploiting the system's trusting nature and using my son as the clean, final signatory. The betrayal was no longer just an abstract plan written on a computer file. It was a physical attack orchestrated by my son's hands on the very infrastructure I taught him to respect. The scheduled water catastrophe was hours away, and the police couldn't stop it. Only a manual override by a technician could. The entire plan, the deceit, the panic, the desperation, was real. I executed the digital audit from the underground panel right then. The physical override command was not merely manual. It had been programmed to lock permanently if the override sequence was manually disrupted. A devastating booby trap installed by Thorne to ensure only he could manage the fallout, securing the chaos. The manual valve itself had been sealed shut.
I had found the smoking gun. The system was now ticking. Any premature intervention would likely ruin the water lines completely for weeks, fulfilling their chaos scenario with total destruction. The clock ran out at midnight. I returned home late Saturday, smelling of mud and silent fear. Janice was already asleep, the unsent mortgage papers sitting like a stone monument on the kitchen table. My strategy switched immediately from defensive evidence to offensive, public confrontation. I had to face both Thorne and Kevin publicly and in person, using the immense weight of the truth to force an immediate, documented surrender before their deadline. My selected arena for the final judgment was my only choice: the monthly North Shore Homeowners Association meeting on Sunday afternoon. A simple meeting of neighbors, the very people Kevin planned to victimize, guaranteeing a full and utterly hostile audience. I set up my final trap. I first placed a final private call to Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," my voice was low and menacing. "It's Stan. The water is fine. Your final sabotage command has been countered with my personal safety override, signed and recorded. I know you cannot cancel the system failure for Monday without bringing in the main crew. We are going to settle this face-to-face at the North Shore Homeowners meeting on Sunday at 3 p.m. You will send Kevin and yourself. We are going to audit your infrastructure plan for all our neighbors." Thorne's answer was cold fury and an immense strategic shift. "Stan, you have ruined everything. You will bring that map. My representative will meet you. And if that name of that highway project ever leaves your lips in public, I will not send Kevin to prison.
I will send you to the one place you belong, an absolute loss of identity. I promise you, I will erase you from the system. Be at that meeting, Stan, and bring the papers. Bring the entire farce to the surface." The final confrontation was scheduled, but Thorne was not done making moves against my personal life. Later that Saturday night, while I was carefully photographing my printouts of the original water supply diversion work order with Kevin's initial and the sabotage code, the phone rang. It was a local private detective company, their voice low and professional. "We've received an assignment regarding your legal standing. We're interested in the details surrounding your sudden voluntary retirement from the utility department a few months ago." My blood ran cold. The phone call confirmed Thorne's immense power. My own exit from the utility department was compromised. They were preparing not just a financial attack, but a reputation destruction job. A complex, layered effort to prove my past good dog image was just a convenient front for my own secret history of municipal malfeasance. Thorne's strategy wasn't just about destroying the map evidence. It was about destroying Stan Miller's credibility entirely, proving that my honest claims were merely the revenge fantasies of a disgraced and possibly unhinged employee who held the secrets. The threat was terrifyingly absolute. But the final shockwave came after I finally finished my secure file transfer and went to bed utterly spent. The shock came through Janice's terrified eyes. She stood in the dark hall outside our room, staring not at me, but at the light coming from my computer screen in the next room, the light from my archived evidence of betrayal. "Stan, are you ready to talk about the disaster map?" She didn't shout. Her voice was thin, completely empty of all emotional defense. Her eyes weren't those of an enemy or a naive victim. They were the eyes of a co-conspirator who had been broken under the weight of an unacknowledged past. The confrontation with Thorne was planned for 3 p.m. on Sunday, but the internal, most devastating confession was about to happen right now in my hallway. The fight wasn't just against Kevin. The threat wasn't just against the town. My marriage itself was an intricately arranged secret I was completely blind to. My biggest crisis was about to happen in the hallway. The chilling clarity in Janice's voice, "Are you ready to talk about the disaster map?" shattered my assumption that she was a naive victim. I braced for the deepest possible betrayal from the woman I loved and protected. She confessed everything. Her confession was less about an immediate act of conspiracy and more about the lifelong burden of an impossible choice. Years ago, during our son Kevin's total financial ruin in the last bust, the emotional pressure was so immense, Janice reached out, not to Kevin, but to his financial mentor, Richard Thorne. She had an agonizing private meeting with him, a tearful, desperate appeal to protect her son's reputation and solvency. Thorne, the predator, agreed, but his price wasn't money.
The price was silence, coerced assistance, and my retirement. Thorne agreed to bankroll Kevin's immediate professional bailout and future plans if Janice used her marriage's influence to perform 2 final, non-negotiable services. 1, she had to secure my signature on the retirement agreement immediately, my early, involuntary retirement from the utilities department based on a single administrative technicality Thorne had hidden. 2, she had to ensure that when the opportunity arose, the Apollo sale, Stan, the utility man, would completely hand over all his personal retirement assets and the clean Central Long Island property, our home, to the Apollo Group.
The early retirement, the only blot on my 35-year honest career, was not a voluntary choice. It was Thorne clearing the system of the one technician with the longevity and ethical framework to understand the crime written in the town's water lines. Janice was trapped. Her fear for her son's ruin forced her into a compact with the devil, turning her into the unwitting executor of a financial war against her own family, the true owner of the honesty that I represented. The immense sadness on her face was not an enemy's smirk. It was a decades-long plea for forgiveness. Her pressure to sign the house away wasn't motivated by greed. It was by a crippling obligation to the loan shark who held her son's career captive. She saw the retirement as the quid pro quo for her son's safety. My rage wasn't aimed at her. It was channeled entirely towards Thorne, the master manipulator who poisoned every personal relationship around him. The North Shore Homeowners Association meeting, my carefully set stage for local judgment, was now the venue for my own exposure and our final act of familial defense. I went to the HOA meeting not as a hero, but as a compromised veteran preparing for the only honest truth left. I arrived precisely at 3 p.m. on Sunday. The community center meeting room, usually full of gentle chatter about garden rules and property taxes, was quiet, intensely focused. Nearly 80 neighbors were crammed into the room. Richard Thorne arrived moments later, accompanied not by Kevin, but by his sleek legal counsel and 2 clean-cut, menacing security guards who stood impassively at the doors. The intimidation kit. Thorne, perfectly dressed, radiating competence and absolute power, dominated the front table. Kevin, the final and most brutal disappointment, arrived last, pale and sweating, but walking with the aggressive certainty of a man facing certain financial ruin, but determined to fight. Thorne launched the attack immediately, before the association could even call the meeting to order. His legal strategy was to destroy my reputation before I could even open the blueprints. "Neighbors," Thorne's voice boomed, full of polished concern, "we are all here today because Mr. Stanley Miller has made outlandish claims to the leadership of my organization, claims that border on emotional disturbance. And since we are neighbors, I am giving Stan one final chance for peace. Your father's life insurance, Janice's financial burden, and Stan's ability to pay off all his debt rests right now on his silence." My wife gasped. The full realization of the threat to Kevin's security hit her immediately. She begged me, quietly, her hands shaking, to just accept the deal. "Stan, please, let him go. It's for Kevin." My response was a slow, controlled escalation. I first held the single signed page of the water supply diversion work order with Kevin's initials facing my children. I saw Kevin instantly pale, knowing I held the proof of his explicit criminal act. "Thorne is lying, neighbors," I said, my voice measured and clear, the perfect voice for reciting utility codes. "He is threatening my retirement and manipulating my family to ensure a vast corporate fraud that starts with destroying the values of your houses." I unveiled the documents I printed, the county road map and the water infrastructure overlays. "This first document," I stated, holding up the blueprint, "is the planned path for the new county highway. Note, Mr. Thorne, that this road runs directly through the useless development land you're attempting to push on my son and anyone else. You are selling your investors future lawsuits, not growth." Thorne's lawyer instantly moved, but I ignored him, my focus fixed entirely on my neighbors and Thorne himself. "But that's not the crime," I said, pointing to the second document, the one showing the engineered water failure. This is the work order I uncovered, a criminal order that is physically set to divert and stall our community's main water line at midnight tonight, forcing low water pressure, shortages, and complete summer panic for days starting Monday. They weren't waiting for a sale. They were engineering a complete market crash to acquire all your houses at pennies on the dollar before the clean money moved in. This fraud uses the very system I built against you all. And the man who authorized this domestic utility terrorism, I slammed the water diversion work order onto the table, was my son, Kevin Miller, operating on behalf of his mentor, Richard Thorne.
The room erupted. Shouts, accusations, the profound sound of communal betrayal. Neighbors, suddenly recognizing the source of all the polite inquiries and predatory pricing from Apollo, started moving, surrounding Kevin and Thorne. Thorne, utterly cornered and exposed in a public, legally damaging venue, delivered his final blow to destroy my final remaining weapon, my credibility. "Stan Miller is mentally compromised and disgraced," Thorne screamed over the rising noise, his veneer of control finally collapsing. The man's retirement was an early, mandatory medical discharge for psychological inability to perform. He doesn't just see system failures, he hallucinates them. I have the private documentation. You will all regret trusting the fantasies of a mentally broken ex-employee. My composure faltered for only 1 second. The deep secret of my early retirement, a discreet, involuntary discharge due to a single minor lapse of stress and control I had fought for months to suppress and hide from Janice, was now exposed, designed to destroy the moral weight of my maps. Thorne had held the final bomb the whole time. But I had anticipated the core of his defense. The honesty of the people I had worked for and with for 35 years was the ultimate physical proof. I didn't reach for a microphone. I reached for Red Kelly, my old, quiet friend who was sitting, visibly shaken, in the back row. "Red, you are a 40-year utility veteran. Is the physical override to that system locked with a security measure that would prevent manual counter-diverting the line tonight at midnight, or is it not? Answer for this association." Red Kelly, faced with the shame of the honest system being used for treason, confirmed my findings instantly, loudly. "The diversion valve is physically sealed shut. A tech specialist is required for safety override. Only Thorne could order that move, and the water failure is already set to go live at midnight." Thorne's entire defense, that my technical assessment was faulty, was crushed by the authority of the active utility department. The public confirmation of the immediate threat was everything I needed. Neighbors started grabbing phones, calling their local city council members and the non-emergency police lines. Thorne's lawyers immediately went into crisis mode. The police were already in transit, dispatched from a different, faraway jurisdiction, tipped off hours earlier by the anonymous call from the HOA meeting leader, acting on a general panic over the water supply. My final act was securing my true asset, Janice. The massive, silent transfer was more important than the crime. I confronted my ruined son and looked directly at the man I saved, Janice's emotional, fragile future. "Kevin, your plot ends tonight. The water diversion must be stopped. You will drive with the local authorities and override that manual valve, explaining to them every single security trap and all the diversion codes your master, Richard Thorne, installed. If you comply, your legal liability may be confined to simple grand theft, not intentional criminal domestic terrorism and corporate malfeasance. If you refuse, I swear I will provide the state and federal prosecutors with the entirety of your financial audit trail from the subprime disaster and every cent your father ever laundered for you." Kevin, trapped by his immediate choice between immediate federal prosecution for major fraud and a simple local plea, caved instantly.
He chose survival, the final gift his father's honesty allowed him. Richard Thorne was cornered and was the sole arrest on Sunday night, picked up by state police as he attempted to destroy crucial evidence in his trunk, all before his main lawyer could reach him. His attempt to buy quiet suburban land had resulted in his complete professional annihilation. Janice, seeing the immediate, terrifying reality of the monster her son became under Thorne's influence, grabbed me, holding on to the moral center of her home for years. Her focus was absolute: our survival, together. Kevin's fate was his own making. He went into custody to reveal all the schematics and secrets to stop the imminent system disaster. He traded his own limited freedom for the complete freedom of the town. My intervention ensured the local prosecutor had the only option to take: saving the town's water and dealing with the political giant. My punishment for my involuntary, early discharge was irrelevant. My credibility, once damaged, was fully restored by my selfless, high-stakes final action. I sold the house on the day of the trial, no longer an anchor, but a symbol of freedom. My reward and my final security with Janice was the massive annuity I received from the liquidation of Thorne's investment funds, transferred under an unencumbered corporate plea deal to me for providing the evidence that ended his multi-state operation. No one ever audited the small private annuity transfer after the federal government was paid its due. We now live in a simple home, funded by the exposure of the truth. My name is Stan Miller. My 35 years of honesty in the background made me the perfect target, but my final action proved that a simple utility worker who knows the system's infrastructure can expose a crime that threatens the foundations of entire suburban American life. My wife finally found peace, resting in the safety that was guaranteed, ironically by the spectacular fall of her only son's wicked, deceitful ambition.